My daughter handed me a card and a 99-cent candle for Valentine's Day. Then her husband pulled out a manila folder and said, "We already signed you into the facility." So I called my lawyer. Before we begin, please subscribe, and I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? They brought gifts and smiles for Valentine's Day, but I saw it in Derek's eyes before a word was spoken. Today wasn't a visit. It was an ambush. The garlic and rosemary had been filling my kitchen since 6 that morning. Pot roast, Melissa's favorite since she was 7 years old, back when she'd climb onto the counter just to smell it cooking. Dorothy used to say I made it too salty, but Melissa never complained. Even now, at 42, she'd light up whenever I mentioned making it. I set 3 plates on the dining table, the good china Dorothy and I got for our wedding. 47 years, those plates had been gathering dust, only coming out for holidays and special occasions. Maybe this could be special. Maybe Melissa and Derek would stay for more than 20 minutes this time. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock. Punctual as always, my daughter stood on the porch with an armload of gift bags and grocery store flowers. Her smile was too wide, too bright, like she was performing for an audience I couldn't see. "Happy Valentine's Day, Dad," she chirped, kissing my cheek with lips that felt cold despite the February warmth. "You look good, really good." Derek appeared behind her, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, eyes already scanning my living room like he was taking inventory. He nodded at me, barely, and stepped inside without wiping his feet on Dorothy's welcome mat. "Smells great in here," Melissa said, though she didn't ask what I was cooking. She used to do that, you know. Walk in and immediately head for the stove, lifting lids and stealing tastes. Not today. She handed me the gift bags with that same rehearsed cheerfulness. Inside, I found a Hallmark card, the kind you grab from the rack without reading, and a vanilla candle that still had a clearance sticker on the bottom. 99 cents from the drugstore. "You didn't have to get me anything," I said, "because that's what you're supposed to say." But the truth was, it hurt. Not the cheap gifts. Hell, I didn't need anything at my age. But the carelessness of it. The afterthought. Derek finally looked at me directly, and that's when I knew. 30 years in the Navy teaches you to read faces, to spot trouble before it announces itself. Derek's expression wasn't hostile exactly. It was worse. It was cold calculation, like a man studying a problem he's already decided how to solve. "Dad, maybe we should sit down," Melissa said, glancing at Derek nervously. "Derek and I have been talking, and we think it's time you moved somewhere safer," Derek interrupted, his voice carrying that corporate smoothness he used with his insurance clients. "A care facility. Maplewood Haven." The words hit me like ice water. Everything in the room went silent. Even the pot roast stopped bubbling. I stared at my daughter, waiting for her to tell me this was some kind of joke, that they'd just come to visit their old man on Valentine's Day. Instead, she looked at her hands. "Whose idea was this?" I asked. "It's out of love, Dad. We're worried about you living alone, especially after that fall." "What fall?" I demanded. "You mean when I slipped on the ice last month? The ice nobody helped me clear because nobody comes around here anymore?" Derek reached into his coat and pulled out a manila folder, setting it on my coffee table like he was closing a business deal. "Everything's arranged. We've already spoken with the facility director." I opened the folder with shaking hands. Transfer documents, medical assessments I'd never seen before, and at the bottom, a signature that looked like mine but felt like forgery. "Who benefits from this?" I asked, looking directly at Derek. "Because it sure as hell isn't me." Derek started moving around my living room, positioning himself between me and the front door. Casual-like, but I recognized the tactic. I'd used it myself in uniform, back when containment mattered more than courtesy. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way," Derek said, his corporate mask finally slipping. We've already talked to the county. Your choice. I stood up then, my heart hammering but my hands steady as a rock. 40 years I'd worked 3 jobs to give Melissa everything she wanted. 16-hour days so she could have dance lessons and college and a wedding I couldn't afford. And this was her thank you. Get out of my house, I said. Both of you. Melissa started to speak, but I slammed my cane against the hardwood floor hard enough to rattle the windows. Derek just shrugged. We'll be back tomorrow at 9 in the morning, with the movers. Be ready. They left without another word, and I locked the door behind them, double-checked every bolt, then turned off the oven and let that perfect pot roast sit there, growing cold and untouched. That night, I pulled out my old Navy trunk and wedged it against the bedroom door, loaded a baseball bat and flashlight beside my bed. Around 2 in the morning, I made a list. Call Thomas Green, inventory assets, hide critical documents, watch and record. At 7:30 the next morning, I peeked through the curtains and felt my blood turn to ice. A moving truck sat in my driveway, 2 hours early, and behind it, Derek's black sedan gleamed like a hearse in the morning light. Maplewood Haven looked like a hotel on the outside, but inside, it was a holding cell for people they'd already stripped of everything. I refused to open the door when they knocked. Didn't matter. Derek had Melissa's emergency key, the one I'd given her years ago for real emergencies, not manufactured ones. The lock turned with a click that sounded like a death sentence. 2 uniformed movers pushed past me into my bedroom, ignoring my protests like I was furniture they had to work around. Derek stood in my doorway, arms crossed, watching me clutch that baseball bat like it could somehow turn back time. "Make this easy on yourself, Walter," he said, not even trying to sound sympathetic anymore. I watched 40 years of my life disappear into unmarked cardboard boxes. My Purple Heart from Vietnam, earned when shrapnel tore through my shoulder during Tet. Dorothy's funeral dress, still wrapped in plastic, still smelling faintly of her perfume. My Navy uniform with the pressed creases she'd iron every Veterans Day, even after I retired. "Where are they taking my things?" I demanded. "Storage," Derek said without looking up from his phone. "For safekeeping." Safekeeping. Like I was already dead. Melissa arrived 20 minutes later, her eyes red and puffy, though whether from crying or allergies I couldn't tell anymore. She rushed to hug me, whispering apologies that felt as hollow as campaign promises. "This is just temporary, Dad, until you get settled, until you feel better." "I feel fine," I said. "I felt fine yesterday. I'll feel fine tomorrow." "The doctors said..." "What doctors? When? I haven't seen a doctor since my physical in November." She couldn't answer that, just squeezed my hand and looked away. They loaded me into Derek's BMW like cargo, child locks engaged. I checked. Derek caught me testing the door handle in his rearview mirror and smirked. "Safety first, Walter." I memorized every turn, every street sign, every landmark. Springfield had been my home for 47 years. I knew these roads like Dorothy's face, like the sound of Melissa's laugh when she was still small enough to sit on my shoulders. Now they felt foreign, like I was being driven through someone else's life. Maplewood Haven sat on the outskirts of town, all red brick and manicured lawns. A sign by the entrance promised compassionate care for your loved ones. The parking lot was full of expensive cars, BMWs, Lexuses, Mercedes, not the kind of vehicles you'd expect at a place where people came to die with dignity. Eric Sloan met us at the front desk, all polished shoes and corporate smile. Young guy, maybe 35, with the kind of handshake that lingered too long and eyes that never quite met yours directly. "We've been expecting you, Mr. Grady," he said, like I'd made a reservation at a restaurant instead of being shanghaied into captivity. Melissa tried her reassuring voice again. You'll love it here, Dad. They have bingo nights and movie screenings. And the food is supposed to be really good. I looked around the lobby. Keycard locks on every door. Security cameras in corners I'd bet most people didn't notice. A nurse stationed behind bulletproof glass, watching everything through tired eyes. Room 247 was beige. Everything beige. Walls carpet, bedspread, curtains, like they'd drained all the color out of life itself. My toolbox sat on the dresser, next to a framed photo of Dorothy, both looking as out of place as a tuxedo at a barbecue. Eric explained the rules with the enthusiasm of a flight attendant going through safety procedures for the 1,000th time. Medication at 8 in the morning and 8 at night. Meals at 6. Visiting hours ended at 9. Leaving required family and medical authorization. When can I leave? I asked. Eric's smile never wavered. That's not up to you, Mr. Grady. Not up to me. In my own life, decisions about my own future weren't up to me anymore. That first night, I lay on sheets that smelled like industrial bleach and listened to the sounds of my new prison. A buzzer at the nurse's station going off every few minutes. A woman down the hall crying softly. The kind of crying that comes from deep places you can't bandage or medicate. A man somewhere talking to people who weren't there, having animated conversations with ghosts. The next morning, someone knocked on my door. Not the sharp, authoritative knock of staff, but gentle, almost hesitant. Mr. Grady, I'm Robert Whitaker, room 245, right next door. I opened the door to find a man about my age, maybe a little older, with silver hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had the look of someone who'd been important once. Good posture, firm handshake, clothes that were simple, but well kept. You're not one of the sheep, are you? He asked, studying my face like he was reading a book. I didn't answer right away. Trust wasn't something you handed out like business cards in a place like this. Depends, I said. What's the alternative? Robert smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen since Derek pulled up in my driveway. Breakfast is in 20 minutes. Why don't you sit with my friends and me? We meet at the table by the east window, away from the cameras. The east window table turned out to be occupied by 3 of the most alert-looking residents I'd seen since arriving. Robert introduced them like he was presenting a war council. Mary Lou Kensington, 76, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes sharp enough to cut glass. She'd been a librarian for 40 years before her son convinced her to sell her house and simplify her life. The son disappeared with the proceeds 2 weeks later. Frank DeMarco, 74, built like a bulldog and twice as stubborn. Rough hands that spoke of a lifetime working on engines and fixing things that were supposed to be broken. His daughter had gotten power of attorney under the guise of helping with his taxes, then sold his auto repair shop while he was in the hospital for a minor procedure. And Robert himself, Robert Whitaker, former attorney, sharp as a tack and mad as hell. His son had used his retirement savings as collateral for business loans that went bad, then had him declared incompetent when Robert threatened to sue. Same template, Mary said when I finished telling my story. Different names, same script. They're not even being creative about it anymore. Frank leaned forward, lowering his voice. This place isn't what it pretends to be. It's a machine for stealing from old people, and we're the raw materials. Robert nodded grimly. Eric Sloan isn't just an administrator. He's a broker. He connects desperate families with lawyers who specialize in fast-tracking guardianship cases. Everyone gets a cut except us. I felt something I hadn't felt since Derek walked into my house with that manila folder. Hope. Not the wishful thinking kind, but the cold, calculating hope that comes from finding allies in enemy territory. What do you want to do about it? I asked. Mary handed me a cookie from her lunch tray and smiled like a grandmother planning to poison her ungrateful relatives. You're smart, Mr. Grady. But if you want to survive here, you'd better become dangerous. They caged us thinking we were finished, but they'd accidentally locked us in together. The next morning, Robert invited me to join their unofficial breakfast club at the east window table. I'd spent the night thinking about Mary's words, rolling them around in my mind like dice I wasn't sure I wanted to roll. Becoming dangerous at 70 wasn't exactly in my retirement plans. Frank DeMarco looked me up and down when I approached their table, sizing me up like a used car he wasn't sure he wanted to buy. "Navy, huh?" he said, nodding at the anchor tattoo on my forearm, faded now, but still visible. My brother was a Marine. Tough bastard. "Were you in the service?" I asked. "Korea. Army mechanic. Fixed tanks and trucks that came back looking like Swiss cheese." He stirred his oatmeal aggressively. "Learned that anything broken can be fixed if you know where to look and you're not afraid to get your hands dirty." Mary set down her coffee cup with the precision of a chess player making an opening move. "Why are you really here, Mr. Grady? And don't give us the official story about falling and needing care. We've heard that song before." I glanced around the dining hall. Staff members moved between tables, but none were close enough to overhear. Still, I kept my voice low. My daughter and her husband decided I was worth more to them in storage than at home. They forged guardianship papers and put my house up for sale while I was sleeping. Robert's jaw tightened. Same template. They all use the same playbook now. "It's not just greed," Mary said, her librarian's mind organizing facts like books on shelves. "It's systematic. My son disappeared with my money, but he didn't plan it alone. Someone taught him exactly what paperwork to file, which lawyers to call, how to make it look legitimate." Frank pulled out a worn notebook from his shirt pocket. "I've been tracking the turnover here. 63 residents in the past year. Average stay, 4 weeks. Know what happens right after someone leaves?" He flipped to a page covered in his mechanical handwriting. "Real estate listings. Every single time. House goes on the market within days of transfer." Robert leaned forward. "Eric Sloan isn't just running a care facility. He's running a processing center. Families bring their inconvenient relatives here. He provides the legal framework to strip their assets. Everyone gets paid except us." I felt that familiar military sensation, the moment when intelligence gathering shifts into mission planning. "What do you need me to do?" "Intelligence," Robert said. "You're new, so Eric doesn't see you as a threat yet. That gives you access to conversations and areas we can't reach anymore." Mary smiled, that sweet grandmother smile that probably terrified her son when he was misbehaving. "Plus, you still have connections on the outside. A lawyer, presumably. Bank accounts they haven't frozen yet." Resources. Frank closed his notebook. "We handle documentation and research. You handle reconnaissance and external communication. Think you can manage that, sailor?" "I've run more dangerous operations with worse odds," I said. That afternoon, I put the plan into action. Pretended to nap in the common room near the staff break area, tilting my chair so I could see through the partially open door. Around 3 o'clock, Eric Sloan walked in with his phone pressed to his ear. "Melissa wired the extra 5,000 this morning," he said, his voice carrying that same corporate smoothness he'd used with me. "I'll get Dr. Martinez to sign off by tomorrow. Then we can move to Phase 2. Phase 2? I didn't like the sound of that. I'd learned to use the voice memo app on my phone. Melissa had taught me years ago, back when she still pretended to care about keeping in touch. The irony wasn't lost on me. The recording was muffled, but clear enough to make out the important parts. That evening, I shared the audio with Robert. He listened twice, his expression growing grimmer each time. "This changes everything," he said. "They're not just taking advantage of confused families. They're actively coaching them through the process." Frank had been busy, too. During his daily sports news check at the public computer terminal, he'd found something that made my blood run cold. My house was listed on a private real estate website, photos and all. Listed by Melissa Grady Barnes as a motivated seller property. The asking price was $380,000. The photos had been taken weeks ago, probably by Derek during one of their previous visits. Every room, every angle, marketed like I was already dead. When did this go live? I asked. 3 days ago, Frank said. Same day you arrived here. Mary had her own intelligence network. A neighbor lady who still sent her homemade cookies had agreed to drive by my house and take pictures. The photos arrived via text on Mary's ancient flip phone, a for sale sign planted in my front yard, like a gravestone. They're not even waiting, I said. They've got me locked up and they're already spending the money. Robert adjusted his glasses. That's their mistake. Premature execution. If we can prove they initiated the sale before establishing legal guardianship, every step becomes criminal fraud instead of civil manipulation. Over the next few days, we developed our roles like a military unit. Robert handled legal research, using his attorney background to identify weak points in their strategy. Frank continued monitoring public records and real estate databases. Mary observed visitor patterns and staff behaviors, cataloging every detail with the systematic precision of a trained researcher. My job was the most dangerous, getting close to Eric Sloan without raising suspicion. I started small, complained about my room temperature during his rounds, asked innocent questions about facility policies, played the confused old man who was grateful for his help. Eric ate it up, probably seeing me as another easy mark to process through his system. One evening, he stopped by my room after dinner. Mr. Grady, we should talk about your future here. Maybe move you to one of our nicer wings. I played along. That would be wonderful. When might that happen? Soon. Very soon. Your daughter mentioned upgrading your accommodations once certain financial arrangements are finalized. Financial arrangements? Eric's smile was all teeth and no warmth. The sale of your property. She's quite concerned about ensuring you have the best possible care. When is that supposed to happen? Oh, these things move quickly once the paperwork is in order. Could be any day now. When he left, I immediately found Robert. They're about to close. We're running out of time. Frank had more bad news. The house listing had been updated to offer accepted. A young couple had placed a down payment, scheduled to close within the week. They committed, Robert said, legally and financially. Now we can file. But we needed one more piece of evidence. Proof that Melissa and Derek were actively participating in the fraud, not just victims of Eric's manipulation. Frank's computer skills turned out to be more extensive than just checking sports scores. He'd managed to access email correspondence between Derek and the real estate agent, Jennifer Walsh. One message made my hands shake. We're ready to close as soon as my father-in-law signs the final papers. Don't worry about him being difficult. He's basically out of the picture now. Out of the picture. Like I was already dead to them. Print everything, I told Frank. Names, dates, dollar amounts. Every email, every document, every piece of evidence we can find. Mary had arranged one final piece of the puzzle. Through her network of former library colleagues, she'd confirmed that Dr. Martinez, the physician supposedly treating me for dementia, had never met me. His signature on my medical files was authentic, but he'd signed them based entirely on Eric's verbal reports, medical fraud on top of everything else. We move tomorrow, Robert decided. Melissa and Derek are scheduled to visit Thursday morning. They'll want your signature on final transfer documents. Let them come, I said. I'll give them a performance they'll never forget. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of institutional despair, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something. Eric Sloan was confident, maybe too confident. Like he had backup plans we hadn't discovered yet. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold. At 8:59, I watched through the common room window as Melissa and Derek walked up the front steps, Derek carrying a leather briefcase like he was closing a business deal. Which, I suppose, he was. I pressed record on my phone and waited for them to seal their own fate. Proof, Traps, and the House of Lies, Part 4. They thought the house was already theirs. They forgot one thing. I never signed it away. The common room had been cleared for sanitation, Eric's excuse to give Melissa and Derek privacy for what they assumed would be my final surrender. I sat at the center table, my phone hidden beneath a folded newspaper, already recording. The red dot on the screen felt like a loaded weapon. Mary positioned herself at a nearby table with her crossword puzzle, her backup recording device tucked inside her knitting bag. Frank lingered at the public computer terminal, pretending to check email while actually monitoring the security camera feed. Robert stayed in his room, legal brief ready, waiting for my signal to head for the courthouse. We'd rehearsed this like a military operation, because that's exactly what it was. Melissa walked in first, her smile as artificial as the flowers she'd brought on Valentine's Day. "You look great, Dad. We're so proud of how well you're adjusting here." Derek followed with his leather briefcase, all business. No pretense of family warmth this time. He sat across from me and opened the case like a surgeon laying out instruments. "We have some paperwork to finalize," he said, spreading documents across the table. "Power of attorney confirmations, guardianship filings, and a closing agreement for my house. Just a few signatures and we can get you moved to that nicer room we discussed." I squinted at the papers, playing the confused old man they expected me to be. "What exactly am I signing here?" Melissa leaned forward, her voice dripping with fake concern. "It's for your benefit, Dad. A better room, upgraded medical care, maybe even a private nurse. You deserve the best." "This is about the house sale," I said, making it a statement, not a question. Derek's corporate mask slipped for just a moment. "The sale will provide resources for your care. Long-term care is expensive." "What happens to the rest of the money?" Melissa hesitated. Derek stepped in smoothly. "We'll manage it responsibly. You don't have to worry about financial decisions anymore." I picked up the pen, then set it down again. What if I get better? What if I want to go home? Derek's patience cracked like ice on a warm day. "You're not getting better, Walter. The doctors confirmed dementia. You just don't remember the diagnosis." "Which doctors?" I asked. "When did they examine me?" "Dr. Martinez evaluated you last week," Melissa said quickly. "You were having one of your confused episodes." I stared at her, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "I've never met Dr. Martinez." "Dad, you're doing it again. The confusion, the memory gaps. This is exactly why we need to make these arrangements now, while you can still understand what's happening." Derek checked his watch. "Look, we don't have all day. The closing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Just sign the papers." I picked up the pen again, then paused. "Will the money be in my name, or yours?" "It'll be managed in your best interest," Derek said, his corporate speak failing to hide his irritation. "That's not what I asked." Melissa's voice cracked under pressure. "Dad, just trust us. This is already happening whether you sign or not. Don't make it harder than it has to be." There it was, the admission we needed, already happening. They'd moved forward with the sale without my consent, and now they needed my signature to make it look legitimate after the fact. I set the pen down and rubbed my forehead. "I need a moment. This is all very confusing." "Of course," Melissa said, relief flooding her voice. "Take your time." They stepped into the hallway to give me privacy, probably to coordinate their final push. I had maybe 5 minutes. I whispered toward Mary's table. "Got it. Every word. Phase 1 complete." Mary's needle didn't stop moving through her yarn, but I caught her almost imperceptible nod. Frank appeared at my shoulder. They're arguing in the hallway. Derek's getting pushy. I pulled out my phone and sent the predetermined text to Robert. Moving to Phase 2. Then I activated the most dangerous part of our plan. I called the number Frank had found for Jennifer Walsh, the real estate agent handling the sale. When she answered, I identified myself as the property owner and asked a simple question. Has the sale of my house been finalized? Mr. Grady, I thought you were in assisted living. Your daughter said you weren't able to make decisions anymore. I'm making decisions just fine. What's the status of my property? Well, we have an accepted offer, but we're waiting for final documentation. There seems to be some confusion about the power of attorney paperwork. I never signed a power of attorney. I never authorized this sale. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like an eternity. Mr. Grady, I think you should contact your attorney immediately. If what you're saying is true, we have a serious legal problem. That's exactly what I plan to do. I ended the call just as Melissa and Derek returned, their fake smiles back in place, but strained around the edges. Feeling better, Dad? Melissa asked. Much better. In fact, I just had a very interesting conversation with Jennifer Walsh. Derek's face went white. Melissa looked confused for a moment before understanding hit her like a freight train. Dad, you shouldn't be making phone calls without supervision. You might say something that could complicate things. Complicate what, exactly? The sale of my house without my knowledge or consent? Derek stood up abruptly. Let's cut the crap, old man. We've done everything legally. The house is sold. The papers are filed. You can sign these documents and make it easy, or we can do this the hard way. What's the hard way? Involuntary commitment, emergency guardianship, court-ordered transfer of assets. His corporate mask was completely gone now, replaced by cold calculation. Your choice. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. The little girl who used to sit on my lap while I read her bedtime stories, who cried when I left for deployment and threw herself into my arms when I came home, who walked down the aisle in Dorothy's wedding dress while I fought back tears. You know what breaks my heart, Melissa. It's not that you're stealing from me. It's that you're not even good at it. I stood up, my cane steady in my hand. I called my attorney an hour ago. I called the county clerk's office 30 minutes ago. I called the FBI Financial Crimes Unit 15 minutes ago. That last part was a bluff, but they didn't know that. Derek grabbed his briefcase. You're bluffing. You're a confused old man in a nursing home. Nobody's going to believe you. Want to bet on that? I pulled out my phone and played back Derek's voice from our recording. You're not getting better, Walter. The doctors confirmed dementia. You just don't remember the diagnosis. Then Melissa. This is already happening whether you sign or not. Derek's corporate composure cracked completely. That recording is inadmissible, illegal wiretapping. I'm recording conversations about my own medical care and financial arrangements. Perfectly legal. I smiled at him the way I used to smile at enemy prisoners who thought they were smarter than they were. But you know what's not legal? Fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit theft. Melissa started crying. Real tears this time. Not the manufactured ones from Valentine's Day. Dad, please. We just wanted to help. The house is too big, and you're all alone, and we were worried. You were worried about money, my money, and you thought I was too old and stupid to figure it out. Derek was already heading for the door. This isn't over. You're right, I called after him. It's just getting started. They left without another word, and I sat back down at the table. Mary had moved to the chair beside me, her knitting forgotten. How do you feel? She asked. Like I've been planning this moment for 70 years and didn't know it. Frank appeared with a grin that belonged on a mechanic who'd just fixed an engine everyone else said was beyond repair. The real estate listing just changed to sale pending legal review. Jennifer Walsh isn't taking any chances. Robert emerged from his room with a thick folder under his arm. Emergency injunction is ready to file. All we need now is to get to the courthouse before they try to accelerate their timeline. Then let's go make some noise, I said. But as we gathered our evidence and prepared to leave Maplewood Haven, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just won a battle, not the war. Derek hadn't looked defeated when he left. He'd looked like a man moving to Plan B, and I had no idea what Plan B might involve. They walked in expecting my signature. I gave them a performance. The cab ride to Thomas Green's law office felt like a prison break. Robert sat beside me, clutching our evidence folder like it contained state secrets, which, in a way, it did. "You sure the flash drive is in there?" I asked for the third time. Robert patted his coat pocket. "Right here, plus backup copies with Mary and Frank." Thomas Green looked older than I remembered, but his handshake was still firm. 40 years of practicing law had given him the kind of steady presence you wanted in your corner when the world went sideways. "Walter, I have to say, this is the most organized case of elder fraud I've seen in decades." He spread our evidence across his conference table. "Audio recordings, real estate fraud, forged medical documents. They handed you everything on a silver platter. What's our next move? We file emergency injunctions today. Stop the sale, freeze all assets, open criminal proceedings." Thomas picked up the recording device. "This conversation with Derek alone is enough for multiple felony charges. How long before we get a court date?" "Judge Margaret Davis is handling emergency cases this week. If we file by 4 o'clock, we could have a hearing by Friday." Robert leaned forward. "What about Maplewood Haven? Eric Sloan?" "Once this goes public, the state will launch its own investigation. Places like that don't survive scrutiny." Thomas gathered the documents. "Let's go make some lawyers very unhappy." The Cook County Courthouse was a maze of marble and bureaucracy, but Thomas navigated it like he'd been born there. We filed emergency motions for asset protection, criminal fraud charges, and immediate release from involuntary guardianship. "How do you feel?" Robert asked as we watched the clerk stamp our paperwork. "Like I'm about to find out what justice actually costs." Thursday evening, I called Melissa from Thomas's office. She answered on the first ring. "Dad, where are you? The staff said you left for a medical appointment, but I'm with my attorney. The real one, not whoever Derek found for you." Silence. "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, Judge Davis's courtroom. Be there." "Dad, I don't understand what's happening." "You will." Friday morning arrived cold and bright. The courthouse lobby buzzed with lawyers and defendants, but I only had eyes for the entrance. At 9:45, Melissa and Derek walked in with a man I didn't recognize. Expensive suit, nervous expression. Derek spotted me first. His confidence had evaporated overnight. "Walter, we need to talk." "We'll talk in court." Judge Margaret Davis was everything Thomas had promised. Sharp, no-nonsense, intolerant of games. She reviewed our evidence while the courtroom waited in silence. "Mr. Barnes," she said, looking at Derek, "you initiated the sale of property you don't own, based on guardianship you don't have, for a man who was never declared incompetent." "Is that correct?" Derek's lawyer whispered something urgent in his ear. "Your Honor, my clients believed they were acting in Mr. Grady's best interests." "Belief doesn't create legal authority." Judge Davis picked up the audio transcript. "Let me read from the defendant's own words. This is already happening, whether you sign or not." She looked directly at Melissa. "Miss Barnes, did you authorize the listing of your father's property?" Melissa's voice was barely audible. "Yes." "On what legal basis?" We thought," Eric Sloan said. "Eric Sloan has no authority to grant you power of attorney." Judge Davis set down the papers. The sale is voided immediately. All assets return to Mr. Grady's control. Criminal charges will be filed for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Derek stood up. Your Honor, this is a family matter. We can resolve this privately. Fraud isn't a family matter, Mr. Barnes. It's a felony. Thomas presented the medical evidence next. Dr. Martinez appeared via video conference, looking deeply uncomfortable. Doctor, did you ever examine Mr. Grady? No, Your Honor. I signed the evaluation based on reports from Eric Sloan. Without seeing the patient? It was highly irregular. I regret the decision. Judge Davis turned to me. Mr. Grady, do you wish to make a statement? I stood up, my cane steady in my hand. Your Honor, I spent 30 years in the Navy defending this country. I worked 3 jobs for 40 years to give my daughter everything she wanted. I buried my wife in the house they tried to steal. They didn't just commit fraud. They tried to erase me. I looked directly at Melissa. I raised you better than this. Melissa broke down completely. Dad, I'm sorry. Derek said it was the only way. He said you'd thank us later. Derek grabbed her arm. Don't say another word. It's too late for that advice, Judge Davis said. Bailiff, please escort Mr. Sloan to custody. He's wanted for questioning by the state attorney's office. Eric Sloan had been sitting in the back of the courtroom, probably hoping to slip out unnoticed. 2 officers flanked him as he stood. This is a mistake, he said. I provide legitimate elder care services. To 47 families in 3 years. Thomas had done his homework. All following the same pattern of asset liquidation. Eric's face went gray. Judge Davis delivered the final ruling. Melissa and Derek were sentenced to 18 months each, with full restitution. Eric Sloan faced multiple felony charges. Maplewood Haven would be shut down, pending investigation. The court finds the defendant's actions constitute systematic elder abuse designed to defraud vulnerable adults of their life savings. This behavior represents a particularly cruel form of theft, stealing not just money, but dignity, autonomy, and family trust. Walking out of that courthouse felt like walking out of prison. Robert, Mary, and Frank were waiting on the front steps, grinning like conspirators who'd just pulled off the heist of the century. How does it feel to be a free man? Mary asked. Like I just remembered who I used to be. 2 weeks later, I hosted dinner at my house for the first time since Dorothy's funeral. The table was set for 4, with the good china and fresh flowers. Pot roast filled the kitchen with the smell of home. Robert raised his glass of wine. To Walter Grady, who reminded us that being old doesn't mean being helpless. Frank clinked his beer bottle against Robert's glass. To friends who fight back. Mary smiled that grandmother smile that had terrified Eric Sloan in court. To proving that sometimes the good guys win. Outside, snow began falling on Springfield, covering the ground like a clean slate. I closed the curtains, turned to my new family, and said what I'd been waiting 70 years to say. She chose greed. I chose to fight. And this right here, is what winning looks like. They thought it was just paperwork. They didn't know I'd weaponized it. 3 months later, the ripple effects were still spreading. The Illinois State Attorney General launched a statewide investigation into elder care facilities. 47 families filed a class action lawsuit. Robert testified before the state legislature about new protection laws. I kept the newspaper clipping on my kitchen table. Maplewood Haven scheme nets millions in stolen assets. Eric Sloan got 12 years. His operation had been bigger than we'd imagined. A network of facilities across 3 states, all running the same con. Feels strange being famous, Mary said, setting down her coffee cup. She'd moved into a small apartment 2 blocks from my house after getting her money back from her thieving son. Infamous, Frank corrected. He'd reopened his auto shop with the settlement money, but still came by every Sunday for dinner. The bad guys made us famous. Robert chuckled from his spot at the kitchen table. Famous for refusing to be victims. There's worse things to be known for. The phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Reporters still called occasionally, wanting updates on the Springfield elder fraud case. I'd told my story enough times, but this message was different. Mr. Grady, this is Sarah Chen from the Cook County Public Defender's Office. I have a client, elderly gentleman, similar situation to yours. He heard about your case and wondered if you might be willing to help. Could you call me back? I looked at my 3 friends, my chosen family. Sounds like there's more work to do. Robert grinned. You thinking what I think you're thinking? I'm thinking Eric Sloan wasn't the only shark in the water. Over the next few weeks, we developed what Mary dubbed the Springfield Protocol, a systematic approach to identifying and stopping elder fraud before it succeeded. Robert handled the legal research. Frank tracked financial patterns. Mary coordinated with families. I worked with victims. The first case was Harold Morrison, 81, whose nephew had convinced him to sign over his farm for tax purposes. Same playbook, different players. We had him out of the bogus care facility and back on his land within 2 weeks. The second was Eleanor Vasquez, 76, whose daughter-in-law had gotten guardianship after claiming Eleanor was unsafe living alone. We found Eleanor sharp as a tack and angrier than a wet cat. Her property was returned. Her daughter-in-law faced charges. We're getting good at this, Frank said after our 5th successful case. Too good, I replied. Makes you wonder how many people we didn't get to in time. One evening in late spring, I sat on my front porch watching the sunset. The same porch where Derek had threatened me, where Melissa had pretended to care. But the anger had faded, replaced by something better. Purpose. Dorothy's photograph watched from the window, and I could almost hear her voice. Took you long enough to find your mission. Sailor. Robert joined me on the porch steps. Any regrets? About fighting back? Never. I took a sip of beer. About Melissa? Every day. She made her choice. So did I. Doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. The mail truck stopped at my box. Bills, advertisements, and a letter with familiar handwriting. Melissa's. I opened it carefully. Dad, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. Prison gives you time to think about what you've done, about who you used to be before everything went wrong. Derek and I are divorced. I'm getting counseling. I'm trying to understand how I became someone who could hurt you like that. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I remember who you really are, and I'm ashamed of who I became. I hope someday I can be the daughter you deserved. Love always, Melissa. I folded the letter and put it in my shirt pocket. Bad news? Robert asked. Complicated news. The hardest kind. My phone buzzed with a text from Mary. New case in Peoria. 83-year-old veteran. Family trying to sell his metals. You available? I typed back. On my way. Robert stood up. Another rescue mission? Another chance to prove that old doesn't mean helpless. We climbed into Frank's truck. He insisted on driving since his settlement bought him a new F-150. Mary waited with case files and her fierce determination to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. As Springfield faded in the rearview mirror, I thought about the path that led me here. Valentine's Day had been supposed to be a day of love and family. Instead, it became the day I learned who my real family was. Not the people who shared my blood, but the people who shared my fight. The sun set behind us as we drove toward Peoria, toward another family in crisis, toward another chance to prove that courage doesn't have an expiration date. I'd spent 70 years learning how to be Walter Grady. Now I finally knew what that meant. It meant never giving up, never giving in, and never letting the bastards win. Dorothy would have been proud.